Thank you so much, Abigail, and thank you to all of the organizers. I was really excited to get to present and to hear everyone else's wonderful work. So I will share my screen now. Okay. Before taking over entire canvases as independent still lives, food began by encroaching upon sacred narratives. In a genre of painting first developed in Antwerp in the 16th century, meat and produce heaped on tables or hanging from wooden beams appear close enough to grab, while biblical scenes are visible only at a distance. Scholars of Northern European painting have argued that these edible elements serve underlying schemes of meaning. Victor Stoikida interprets the towering still life in Peter Artsen's Christ in the House of Mary and Martha to symbolize the terrestrial lot chosen by Martha, in contrast to the spiritual path chosen by her sister. And they're here. Similarly, Ethan Caviller suggests that the composition of another Artsen painting challenges the viewer to seek out the minuscule Holy Family among worldly distractions as, quote, a metaphor for the choice between the narrow way and the broad way in life, end quote. In the 1580s, at the height of the reckoning with images brought on by the Counter-Reformation, these so-called inverted still lives became popular among Spanish collectors. Though the virtuous readings outlined above are plausible in the context of Northern Europe, the reception of these paintings in Golden Age Spain requires rethinking. Spanish viewers perceived more complex and troubling messages in the incursion of earthly illusion into the realm of the sacred. Vicente Carducho, a court artist and treatise author, reproaches a picture of Mary and Martha in which the sisters are, quote, surrounded with such a quantity of food, meat, chicken, turkey, fruit, plates, and other cooking instruments that it seemed rather a tavern of gluttony than a residence of sanctity. Instead of finding a clever allegory that directs the beholder to look past earthly temptation, Carducho sees the painting for what it is, a celebration of art's ability to deceive the senses. Even if such criticism did little to diminish the appeal of these images, it offers insight into how Spanish audiences might have experienced them. By discussing a number of other written and pictorial responses, I hope to show how the moral preoccupation with deception shaped the perception of Trompe representations of food, which were intended precisely to deceive the eye. In early modern Spain, the visual arts were richly intertwined with poetry, theater, religion, and politics, sharing not only motifs and content, but an overarching concern with distinguishing deceptive appearances from reality. The key concepts of engaño and desengaño structure and permeate all intellectual discourse of the period, from novels to moralizing tracts to treatises on painting. The binary terms oppose engaño, deception or illusion, and desengaño, the ability to differentiate truth from deception. So a literal translation might be undeception. Engaño describes the fleeting appearances and seductions of the flesh that blind us from reason. Following Thomas Aquinas, the Spanish Benedictine monk Antonio de Alvarado argues that gluttony is the greatest sin of all. Not limited to the consumption of food, it entails the desire for the pleasure of the senses, overcoming better judgment, and in effect deceiving us. The word engaño also refers to the illusions created by art. And contemporary accounts attest that painting could stimulate such unruly desire. Though it has not played a major role in studies of the reception of painting in Spain, the dichotomy between engaño and desengaño inflected how viewers saw and wrote about paintings. The act of looking at images offered an apt metaphor for perceiving the world. One can see through illusion to contemplate higher truths or become ensnared by superficial temptations. In religious paintings featuring illusionistic representations of food, the conflict between delicious deception and sacred truth is eloquently illustrated. Citing the mistake of the classical artist Zeuxis, whose painted grapes attracted hungry birds while his painted human figures failed to scare them away, the artist and author Francisco Pacheco advises painters not to cause viewers to, quote, notice and celebrate the less important things and forget, because of these trivialities, what is principle, end quote. He gives a modern example of the painting of the Last Supper, in which a jar for wine presumably this one, because this is the painting he's talking about, so delights beholders that they fail to appreciate the biblical scene itself. Pacheco draws attention to the analogy between painterly engaño, in this case, the gleaming fictive picture, and the engaños of the world. Both entice the senses and distract us from more meaningful contemplation. The Jesuit author Francisco Arias characterizes vision as a vehicle for the carnal appetite. The desire for pleasure turns the eyes into incorporeal hands that reach out to grasp anything they want. Arias urges readers to resist los engaños de los ojos and discipline the habit of gazing for the sake of pleasure alone. Images of trompe food invite precisely this sort of looking. Commentators emphasize the power of the illusionistic style to deceive the eye rather than to convey meaning. Vicente Carducho denounces an entire class of representation he calls simple imitación, whereby painters neglect more admirable subjects and simply copy the appearance of commonplace objects like bread, fruit, or table settings to create entertaining illusions. Carducho declares that such images may impress the senses, but are scorned by reason and understanding. Just like engaños in life, these pictorial engaños tempt us with fleeting pleasure without providing spiritual substance. Carducho's protagonist of simple imitación is the Italian painter Caravaggio. He compares Caravaggio's virtuosic illusionism to a saucy new dish, prepared with such irresistible flavor that everyone gluttonously follows after him. Carducho compares the style of Caravaggio's paintings rather than their content to the temptation of a savory meal. Even if food is not directly represented, the trompe imitation of nature is associated with stirring the fleshly appetite. In his Meditaciones Espirituales, the Jesuit Luis de la Puente reminds the reader how the rich man, in a popular biblical parable, fell into the deception of earthly pleasures, and you can see he uses the term engaño. He held lavish banquets every day, but failed to nourish his own soul by giving alms to the poor Lazarus, and thus suffered perpetual hunger in hell. In a painting of the same theme, the Sevillian artist Alonso Vasquez incorporates the northern idiom of inverted still lifes to censure the manner in which they tempt viewers to visually indulge. Plates overhang the table, a melon is sliced open, vessels gleam, a basket of goods is held aloft by a charming young woman. But instead of encouraging the viewer to partake in the aesthetic feast, the painting draws attention to its own seductive danger. Set in opposition to the right side of the canvas, where Lazarus languishes and a dog licks his sores, the sumptuous spread of trompe food signifies the temporal pleasures that the rich man chose over eternal life. To feast the eyes on the tantalizing display and ignore the beggar is to participate in the sins that condemn the avaricious man to hell. The beholder's delight in edible illusion is safely organized into a warning against the temptation of worldly engaño and its capacity to blind Christians to their moral duties. Instead of distracting from the sacred narrative, the trompe food elements deepen the painting's virtuous meaning. The manner in which illusionistic representations of food lure the beholder's eyes away from religious subjects forms a visual parallel with the way earthly deceptions distract us from higher truth. The Jesuit author Bernardino de Villegas uses the same analogy when he compares the souls of materialistic women to a tapestry in which a Saint Jerome the size of a finger can barely be seen amidst a lush landscape and array of food. In his 1618 Christ in the House of Mary and Martha, Velázquez offers a solution for the spatial and moral confusion of such images. He invites comparison with Netherlandish inverted still lifes that would have been familiar to his viewers, exemplified here by Peter Artsen's painting of the same subject. While Velázquez's reliance on Artsen's model for the split structure of his canvas is often noted, the way he transforms his sources is more significant. Velázquez reduces the heaps of trompe comestibles dominating the foreground of Artsen's composition to a humble assemblage of fish, eggs, and condiments, restricted to a single table. In the Netherlandish scene, the beholder is easily detained by the sight of food, drink, and merriment. In Velázquez's painting, the girl's gaze calls us into the image, and the old woman points us immediately toward a view of Christ and the two sisters, isolated against the dark wall. Scholars have speculated over whether it is a window into another room or an imagined vision, but there is little ambiguity about the painting's intended subject. Though we can appreciate the young artist's masterful transcription of weathered flesh, fish scales, and garlic skins, there is no chance of mistaking this quiet space for a tavern of gluttony, the eyes guided rather than tempted. The authors and artists I have discussed do not simply moralize the inverted still life in keeping with the stereotype of austere Spanish Catholic taste. Instead, their interpretations contribute to a more nuanced view of how people perceived images in Golden Age Spain. Even as collectors and theorists praised painting's ability to deceive, intellectual concerns heightened sensitivity towards artistic parallels with worldly engaño. Suspicion was raised not only by the overt portrayal of drunkenness or lasciviousness, but by modes of painting which encourage the viewer to look purely for the pleasure of the senses. When they fail to redirect the beholder to more worthy contemplation, images reveal the disconcerting truth that all painting is deception. Thank you.